All right, everyone. Welcome to session 6. So it is Thursday, February 29th, 6:07 p.m. Central Time, taking advantage of the leap year, and we are basically 2/3 of the way through class at this point. For tonight, for session 6, I believe we just have one concept to cover, which is going to be higher order functions. Now, a higher order function is a function that operates on other functions either by taking them in as arguments or by returning them. All right, and so this is a way to make your code even more reusable. And so let's see here, what do we got for this? All right, and so basically the example that we use here is just like building out a calculator, right? And so I can write a function for add, I can write a function for multiply, and then I can call that function directly, or I can call it within something that, and sorry, this wouldn't be multiply, this should be that. And basically reuse it, and it helps me keep my code organized. And it allows me to feed in different things. And so we can build out something like this. We could do function add, and we could say, just say A and B for right now, and then return A plus B. And we all know that I can call that function, right? So I can just do add 5 and 10. And if I run this, right, there's 15. And then same thing if I do function multiply and I do A and B again and return A times B. And we can do console.log and we can do multiply 5 and 10, and I would expect to see 15 and 50 now. And so if I were writing a program that were referencing these and I had to basically keep going back and referencing them individually, it would, and again, it's harder when we're using small snippets of code, but the like if this was hundreds of lines and we had every function you could think of built out on a like a scientific calculator, so there's, or a graphing calculator where there's hundreds of different things that you could do, it would get very tedious to try and call each function and remember where it is and how it's classified and access it directly. Most likely what I would do is I would build some sort of a function that would base, or a method that would be a runner, and that I would access that runner and then use that to access the different functions. And so with something like this, I could write function, we'll call it calculator. And now we're going to say calc A and B. All right. And instead of just calling on add individually, calling on multiply individually, we can actually call calc A, B here. All right. And so what that's doing is I'm also loading in a function. I'm loading in my as a parameter. This becomes a higher order function. I'm also loading in the numbers that I want to do my mathematical operation on, and then I'm returning that function and then the params inside of that function, which will then give me the answer, right? So if I do console.log calculator and we do multiply and we do 6 and 3, right, when I run this, there's my 18. And same thing now, console.log calculator, add, And if I do 6 and 3 again, all right, there's my 9. And so calculator becomes a higher order function. One, because to be a higher order function, it only needs to take in a function as a param or to return it. This one in this case is returning both of them. Now, another place where this becomes helpful, and we're going to skip right out of intro to coding. We're going to skip right over code platoon. We're going to talk about what would be expected of you, like something you would learn as a junior level developer. And that is the solid principles. And you can see, like, when you type in solid as an acronym, like, you get all sorts of stuff here. And this is one of the core principles of object-oriented programming. Some of these are harder to grasp than the others. But the one I want to talk about specifically is the single responsibility principle. And what that means is that the single responsibility principle states that class should do one thing and therefore it should only have a single reason to change. Right. And so where higher order functions would come in is, let's say, if I needed a function that basically parsed a bunch of data out of JSON and then needed to transform the format of it, I could write all of that in one large function. But probably more likely what I would do is write a function that parses JSON data, and then all of the code that I need in here and then feed in that, and we'll just do console.log data so that I'm actually calling my variable, right? And then all of the code in here that I need to do that. And then if I have to, let's say, I have to take something out of an object of arrays and find all the averages and then put it into one object, then I would write a second function that says build object from parsed JSON, right? And then instead of writing this all in one thing, I would then do something like return build object from JSON, and then let's say I do let final JSON parse equal all the code, or basically right. And then I would basically, all of the code that is in here is responsible for parsing my raw data. And then all of the code in here is responsible for assembling it and putting it in my final format. And that way, if the shape of this data changes, I know that all of the code in here deals with the shape of this data, and I only need to modify the code in here, right? And same thing, if the my chief operating officer comes back to me and says, hey, look, let's say that all the parsed JSON data is a bunch of HR stuff, and like, hey, we just started tracking this metric and I need you to do this, and I want it presented this way instead of that way, then I know that I can change the code in here and I leave this alone. And where, again, we have to use our imagination is like, I've just got some comments in here and we've got a couple lines of code. But let's say that this is 500 or 600 lines long and this is 400 or 500 lines long. Those would both be really large functions. We would talk about even starting to break them up more and more at that point. But two big functions would be one 1,000 line function, right? Because that would be a huge mess. And now when you're trying to find things and change things, you end up having to scroll for forever and use your search feature, and you're jumping around in the code and it becomes really hard to look at. And so that's why we use higher order functions, and that's why we use it to organize what we're doing within our code. And this will become more and more apparent as you get further into object-oriented programming, because everything we've done so far, all of these challenges that we're solving are basically examples of functional programming. We're just writing a straight function to solve it, and we're not calling on any classes or shifting data around. All of that is what you'll start to learn next after this class, or once you get into a coding camp, or if you just start to continue to self-learn. Like object-oriented programming is next after the basic algorithm challenges. So that is pretty much it for the slides tonight. Are there any questions on what I just went over? Right, and I'll grab this and we'll throw this in here. Cool. All right. Well, if there aren't any questions with this, like I said, that's pretty much it for the slides. We can take a look at picking out the next challenge, and we can start going on challenges tonight. All right. So we finished with Fizz Buzz, and Blackjack is pretty easy. I think detention will be a good one, if I remember correctly. Yes, okay. So with this one, so we're gonna fork and run, fork the replit. Grab this stuff over here. All right. So all of the students in 5th and 6th grade have detention. You can tell a student is in 6th grade if 6 is the highest number in their student ID. If the highest number in their student ID is less than 6, they are younger, and if it's greater than 6, they are older. The same rule applies for 5th grade students. Write a method that takes in the student's ID as a string of unknown length and returns a Boolean true if that student has detention, or false if they do not. Excuse me. All right. So if we were to look at our two examples down here, we have a 3, a 6, and that's it. Or I'm sorry, 1, 3, and 6. So 6 is the highest number in the string, right? It doesn't matter what order it is. It doesn't matter if it comes last or not. It's the highest number in the string, right? And we can throw in some other stuff in here, right? So if we were to say, get rid of the 6 and 7, we'll put a 5 here and we'll put an 8 before it. It doesn't matter that 5 is the last number. It only matters that 8 is the highest number. All right, so this would also be false. This would be true. We do something like this. 5, 1, and we'll get rid of the 6 down here. This would also be true because this student is in the 5th grade, this student is in the 6th grade, this student is in the 7th grade, and this student is in the 8th grade. So we are getting a string that contains string representations of numbers as well as letters that represent the student ID. We're going to return a Boolean that is true if the highest number is 5 or 6, else false. All right, we'll say C below. As always, we're going to access our params, and then let's start to think about this. So we have a string of numbers and letters. We need to be able to view each character of that string in isolation. We don't really need to do anything with letters, but we need to filter them out. Could use regex for this. Does anyone know what regex is? Have they ever heard of that before?
No.
Okay, so regex is regular expressions and it is not taught in this class. And each language has kind of its own similar version of it. And what it allows you to do is use some preset regex commands to search for basically like patterns in the string that you give it. Now, regex is some people absolutely love regex. It is extremely useful, especially when you're trying to parse information out of forms like web forms and you're trying to get rid of useless information or match on an email address, things like that. It is useful, it is used, it is something that you would definitely cover in a boot camp. But also for most people, regex is hard. And there is a saying in software development that says if you have a problem that requires you to solve it with regex, you now have 2 problems. And the regex to solve this problem wouldn't be too bad. I don't know it off the top of my head, but we could figure it out. But to show you like regex for capturing email address. Right, and so you can see like this is using JavaScript, like this is matching something with regex. And so there are like, when you're learning, like you will get regex challenges, like here's another version of the same thing down here, like here's a huge regex. So while the regex above codes will match most email patterns, but if you still need to match greater than 99% of all email patterns, including the edge cases like plus in the email, then you can use the regex pattern below, right? And so like you can see, this is huge. And So when you're using, excuse me, these weather swings up here are getting to me. So when you're using regex, like full edge case, like production ready regex can get very, very lengthy when you're trying to capture all of the weird things that people can type into forms. Doing something like this, it would be simpler. Now, what I would recommend for this one though is, I mean, no one raised their hand saying, hey, yeah, I know regex, so I wouldn't expect an answer to come back with regex on it. But most likely what we're going to do here is we're going to use a loop to iterate through our string or some other type of data type and examine what the highest number is and compare the different characters in the strings to amongst each other instead of trying to use regex to solve this. So I mean, if you know it and you just didn't raise your hand, go for it. But outside of that, I wouldn't expect to see this in an answer. All right, so we need to take a look at each element or each character in our string. And if it's a letter, we can disregard it. If it's the first number you come across, then we should probably take a look at saving it somewhere so that we can compare subsequent numbers against it and see if the next number is higher or lower. And then once we've gone through all of it, we should have the highest number saved, and we need to check to see if that's 5 or 6. And if it is, then we can return true, else we'll return false. All right, now that is it for the pseudocode and the prep work. Does, excuse me, does anyone have any questions for me before I open up the breakout rooms and move everyone out into teams? It's telling me that the message is too long, so break this apart. So there's that. I will drop it in intro to coding as well, all in one message. Let me pause the recording. All right, everyone, 7:02 p.m. Central Time. Welcome back from the detention challenge. So we're going to go over a couple of different ways to solve this here. The first way is kind of like what I would expect as far as solving. And the other way would be like if I were to solve this for something that I was going to use for real. All right, so first off, let's go ahead and console.log our code. or our param, make sure that we get it. All right, there's all our params, so that's looking good. All right, so now I need to basically be able to look at each one of these individually. All right, and where I want to be careful is that I only need numbers, right? And so if I do is string A greater than 5, right? I get false for that, okay? And what I want to be careful with is that I don't run into some sort of a string that gets converted to like an AC character behind the scenes or something like that, where it throws a bug into this. So the quick way to do this would just to loop through the string itself. So because remember, we could do for let I equal 0, I less than do what is it, ID dot length, and then I plus plus, and then console.log ID box I, and when I do this, right, I've got each of the individual characters through here. This console.log right now. Now, where it becomes a problem is if I want to try and mutate this, because I cannot mutate a string. I'll get yelled at if I do it. So what I would probably want to do is to move this into an array, just to save myself the headache of possibly tripping over that. So I could say R of ID, and we'll call it ID.split on every single character. And then we would replace this with R of ID. And then same thing down here, R of ID. Right, and we get the exact same output, but if we actually take a look at it now, right, there are my arrays of the elements. So now what I could do is take a look at each of these and look at each one individually and make some changes here, right? So I could do something like this. So I could say R of ID I equals parse int R of ID I. Right, and so now we have basically changed each of these to a number, or if it was not a number, basically back to, or we cannot parse a letter into an int. So NaN means not a number, and it's just letting you know that basically whatever you have is not a number. Now, I do want to double check this. So if I say console.log is 5 greater than NaN, right, we get false. So that could be an issue right there, right, where if I'm trying to find the highest number for whatever reason, and I'm not sure what it is in the behind the scenes on JavaScript, we could look this up. JS, Y is NaN greater than. So, and we get into, like I said, we get into some of the behind the scenes stuff, the floating point model used by JavaScript. nan are not a number is by definition not less than, equal to, or greater than any number. Notice that this even applies to two nans. If x is nan and y is nan in this comparison, this will also return false. Below, I quote the portion of IE 754 standard where this behavior is specified. So for mutually exclusive relations are possible, less than, equal, greater than, and unordered. The last case arises when the last one operand is nan. Every nan shall compare unordered with everything, including itself. All right, and so with that, we maybe would want to take a look at doing something, is going a step further in, and instead of switching everything to nan and then comparing it, we would check to see if it comes out to NaN or not. All right, and so let's go ahead and create a variable to hold our highest number. And we'll assign it to 0 right away. And then in here, instead of just going through each of these, we could do something like this. So we could say if R of ID equal, or sorry, R of ID I is triple equal to NaN, which this may blow up on the same thing. Let's see here if it ever actually hits this. Okay, so I never actually hit this, so this never gets true because we're hanging up on the same thing. Let's see here, JS check for nan. So it is nan. All right, so there is something built in to this, right? And so we could say is nan is a function that determines whether a value is nan, first converting the value to a number if necessary, because coercion inside of is nan function can be surprising. You may prefer to use number is nan. So let's take a look at number is nan. So we can say the number is nan static method determines whether a pass value is in the value is the number value nan and returns false. So let's see if we can get that to do true, right? So if we do, sorry, I would need to, I'll make this run this real quick. Forgot to wrap it in a parse int. Let's see if this actually runs it. Okay, still runs into the same thing. So we'll get rid of this. And we'll take this whole thing and we'll wrap it in number dot is nan. Let's see. That should give us that, and that gives us the same description, returns a Boolean value. So let's see if we hit it now. Right, so now we're hitting it. Okay, and so we could also do, let's see when we're hitting it. Excuse me. We'll do console.log that, and then R of ID I. Right, and so we're only getting in here when basically this is nan. Okay, and let's see here, is there an is number? Is integer, so that might be even better. So if we take a look at this, so let's flip this over to is integer. And let's see, we'll run it this way first. Right, so now we're only getting in there when it's this. And so now let's take this out of the parse int and see if it automatically converts it for us. All right, it does not. So we need that parseInt in there. All right, so now we are getting to the right case. And so now we can say something like this. So we'll get rid of our console.log and we can say R of ID I. Let's get rid of this. And let's console.log highest number. All right, 5, 6, 7, 8. So that is correct for each of those. Right. And so what we're doing is we're inside of our for loop. We're taking each individual character of our string it's basically been split out into an array. So each individual element, we're then saying, is that individual element a number? And if it is, cool, then let's check here and say, if it is greater than the existing highest number, replace it with this individual number, right? And so this first time that we iterate through, this is true. This is true. We replace the highest number of 0 with 5. The second time through, this is true. This is false. We do not replace anything. We start back over on our loop. And then the second or the third time through, this one is false. So we never even get in here to check to see if it's greater than highest number or not. And we continue this way throughout the rest of the array of elements there. So now what I would be looking at doing is I can take this highest number and I can check to see if it's a 6 or a 7, right? So I can say return highest number triple equal to 6, or sorry, it's not 6 or 7, it's 5 or 6. Highest number triple equal to 6. Right? And that is all true, 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 true. Now, with this, again, and I won't go over the regex solution. I don't know it off the top of my head, to be honest, and I would probably stumble around with it, trying to figure it out. I can look it up and throw it in here and save it so you can reference it later if you want. But the other way that I would look at tackling this would be basically leveraging some built-ins. And again, some of the more complex built-ins, like there's some really powerful ones with array. So do array. Right, and so we've talked about .map before, and I can replace my for loop with a .map. I can also use .filter, which we have not talked about yet. But what .filter does, as soon as I can find it here in this list, is I can actually give it a callback function, and then it will filter the contents of the array and only return the highest thing out there. Or I'm sorry, not the highest thing out there, but basically anything that meets the criteria of the filter. Right. So if we were to walk through this step by step, so we could do console.log and we could do ID again. All right, we'll run it. And then we could do ID.split. And we'll split on every character. Right. And there is that. And then do this split. And then we'll also do dot map. and we'll call digit, or we'll just call it char for individual character. And then we'll say parse int char, right? And let's go ahead and run it again and see what it looks like. Right, that looks familiar now. Instead of a bunch of individual string characters, we've got numbers or nan. And then I can come back in here and I can do dot filter, and we'll do number, and we can, let's see, I think I can check, or actually, I'm sorry. I can just filter on a data type. So I can actually filter on uppercase number, which is referring to the specific type, right? So like when we see array, uppercase, number, right? So I'm actually referring to, oh, that gave me, not number, this one, right? The actual number, like class inside of JavaScript. And so when I'm doing that, basically it's going to filter these arrays and only return numbers. Right? And now there is something called a spread operator. Or spread syntax. And we haven't really talked about that yet. But what that does is that takes the contents of an array and basically empties it out. So it takes each of the elements outside of the array. And so if we were to do this and put that right there, let's go ahead and run it again. Right, so there are my numbers outside of the array. And now I can take this whole thing and we'll replace the console.log, or actually we'll leave the console.log first. We'll do math.max. Oops. Math.max. Holy cow. There we go. All right, and put that down there. Let's go and clean that up. And let's take a look at this over here. MDN math.max. Static method that returns the largest of the numbers given as an input parameters, right? So we've got them comma separated here. If we do it with an array, we use the spread operator to basically dump the contents out of the array into the function. And so now if I do that, right, now I've just got those largest numbers. So this has replaced this at this point. And so now I can take this out of the console.log and we'll say let highest number equal this. And then we'll just uncomment this down here. Right, and there's our truths. So this is how I would expect it to be solved while we're learning, right? Because we're doing the loop. Filter takes away our conditional logic. It abstracts it away from us. We don't really see what we're doing here. We don't learn how to do this. And as you saw while I was doing this, like I was throwing in things in here, I wasn't necessarily getting what I wanted. I looked up what I was doing wrong. I changed my answers. I ran it again until I got to where I thought I needed to be. And then thought that maybe I could do a little bit better. And I switched over from the is nan to the is integer. And then also did the additional filtering here with this next conditional logic. That's all replaced just by doing this, right? And the map replaces the for loop as a whole. This is the same as it is down here. And then the math.max just finds the highest value, so we don't have to keep doing this over and over again. Right, and so this is what I would expect to see kind of like at production level. This is what I would expect to see while you're going to code Platoon. Any questions about how I solved it either way? Okay, let me pause the recording here. All right, everyone, 7:30 p.m. Central Time. Welcome back from the break. We're gonna get started back up here. One thing that I wanted to throw out there prior to picking the next challenge is not sure if any of you have heard of Python Tutor before or not, but this is a pretty useful tool. And it works for Python, but it also works for, importantly for this class, JavaScript. And what it does is it takes your code and it breaks it down step by step visually. All right, so let's go ahead and click on JavaScript here. And just as an example, I'm going to grab this, copy, throw it in over here. We'll uncomment this code, we'll delete this code. All right, and let's go ahead. I'll also take this out of the console.log because we need it. And we can visualize the execution of our code. All right, now this tells us basically on step one, we've loaded everything into memory and we're about to call our function. All right, and so this over here visually represents the function that we created. It's saved in a block of memory. It's ready for the program to use. All right, so step two is actually calling the function and giving it a parameter to work with. Right, so we do that and we come in here and ID, so the param now is populated. That's the string we gave it. R of ID hasn't happened yet. Highest number hasn't happened yet, but it knows it's there. We've loaded the contents of the function. They're both undefined. So we take the next step. All right, R of ID, right? This is an array. So here's our index 0 through 10. So it's a length of 11. Here's each individual character, right? We hit next again. So highest number is now defined as 0. And we're entering our for loop, right? So now we're looking at this is, we know it's there, but it hasn't been defined yet. So we take that next step. We load in our for loop, I is 0, and we get going, all right? And so we're now going to run this line 5, and that was true. So we come down here to line 6, and that was true. So now we come in here and we should see highest number get reassigned or reassigned a value. And we do. Now it's 5, right? And that's the end of our iteration through our loop. So we come back up here again. I is now 1, right? So we've ticked through our loop one time. I plus plus, so I is 1, right? This is true. So we come in here. This is now 1, so this is false. So we'll skip over this and we'll go to the next iteration of our loop, right? And there's that. Now I is 2, right? And we can speed this up a little bit because the same thing's going to happen over and over again, but we're now iterating through our code step by step, right? And we'll get all the way back here to the end. And we come down here and now we're checking to see if highest number is 5 or if it is 6, and it is 5. So we return the value of true. And so especially while you're starting to get the hang of loops, or if you ever end up finding yourself in a nested loop, but like if your loop isn't outputting what you think it should be outputting, right? So like if I came back here and let's see, we'll edit the code and let's take this is integer out of here and let's look at is nan, right? Like the first time I did this, if we visualize the execution, right, we can come through here, we've got it here, this, and I'm thinking like, hey, this is going to be the number 5, right? And so this is actually going to be false now, right? So I skip over it. So I've just kind of given myself a clue, like hey, this didn't happen the way I thought it was gonna happen, and I can visually see it step by step, right? And so it's the same thing, nothing's gonna happen with this one. But now when I get to my third iteration through, this is true, right? Because now G is gonna result to NaN. And now we come into this next line of code, right? And this shouldn't be true. And it's not, and here we keep going all the way through. And even though I know that 5 is my highest number, when I get to the end of this, I'm going to return false because I've created an error in my function. And this helps me look at each step of my code execution individually. All right, so can help you spot errors that you might not see when you're just looking at the code and it's rifling through it real quick. All right. So, and I will include the link to Python Tutor in the post, but Python Tutor is a good tool. You can use it if you're learning Python. You can also use it if you're learning JavaScript, and it'll help troubleshoot some of these algorithm challenges that you're working on. Any questions about this tool? No? Okay, let's go ahead and pick another challenge. All right, so we just got done with detention, rivers isn't that great. Camel case is a good one. Fork and run. Fork the replet. All right, so I'm not going to pull this whole thing over. I'm just going to have it side by side for right now. Get rid of the console and the shell for right now. All right, so there are a couple of variable naming conventions in programming. They are camel case and snake case. The JavaScript language subscribes to camel case. Camel case is a naming convention for a variable that contains multiple words. The entire first word in the variable's name is lowercase. Every subsequent word's first letter is capitalized. There are no spaces or underlines between words. They are combined together. All right, so if we look at first name is Kramer, right? And in this challenge, you will write a function that takes in a snake case argument and converts the sentence to camel case convention, right? And so we look at these examples down here, and we've got my underscore name underscore is underscore Kramer, right? So this is snake case, and we need to be able to convert this to camel case. All right, so we are going to get a one param that is a snake case string. And the return needs to be the same string in camel case. All right, we'll say see below. Okay, so first, as always, we want to make sure we can access our param. So next, we know that we have one string. We know that we want to get each individual word and we need to get rid of all of these underscores, right? So what built in I don't know if that's I'm spelling that right. Mutable. Yes, mutable versus immutable. Cool. Anyone want to take a stab at that one? Are strings mutable in JS? We've talked about this a couple of times now.
They're immutable.
They're immutable, correct. You're quiet. I think that's what you said, but they are immutable. So you're not just going to be able to change the first letter or first character in each of the strings inside your array directly. You're going to have to figure out another way to reassign the value. All right. So any questions on the prep work for this one? Okay, it's in the channel or in the Zoom chat. It's in the channel. It is 7:40. We'll call it 7:43. So we'll go till we'll say 7:13 or 8:13 on this one. So we'll do a half hour on it. Any questions before I move you into the breakout rooms? All right, here we go. Hey everyone, 8:14 p.m. Central Time. We just got back from the camel case challenge, so let's go ahead and go over a solution together. So first things first, let's make sure that I can see my input. All right, my name is Kramer. First name, array of names. All right, so I know that I want to split, right? And typically we get really used to like splitting on every character, right? Which would give me this, but I don't necessarily want to do that. And if it was written like a normal sentence, like I would do something like this where I split on the empty space. But because there are no spaces in here, that would put it in as one. It's still like basically just like one string inside of my array. So the key to this one is to split it on the underscore. Right, so now we have each word in here as its own separate element, it's its own separate string. Now, let's go ahead and we'll pull this out of the console. We'll just call this array of input. And now we're going to do a for loop, right? So we'll do for let I equal 0, I less than r of input dot length, and I plus plus. So let's go ahead and console.log r of input box I. Right, and we get every single word in here. Now, with that, this is what we're used to doing. We're used to starting to count at 0. We want to hit all of the elements in the array. But with this particular instance, we know that we do not want to change the first element, right? Like these are all already all lowercase. We're good to go. We don't need to do anything. So what I could do is bump this from a 0 to a 1. right? And now we get, instead of my name is Kramer, we just get name is Kramer, name, and then of names. And so now we're not going to mess with the first word in all of our camel case. So those are going to stay all lowercase. We're good to go. Now, when we talked about this, and I gave the hint here that strings are immutable, and that the like we're going to need to do something where we grab the first letter and then we grab all the other letters that are in the string, right? So I can say R of I and say also bracket 0 here. And let's take a look at this. All right, so now I get the N in name, the I in is, and the K in Kramer. So that's looking pretty good to me. And I also want this to now be uppercase. Or sorry, I believe it's 2 uppercase in JavaScript. Yep, so 2 uppercase. There we go. So now that first letter is uppercase. All right, and we could take this out of the console.log and we could say let first letter equal that. And we'll do let rest of word. And right now we won't assign it anything, but let's go ahead and take a look at that. So how do I grab part of a string in JS? All right, so I'm seeing substring. All right, so let's do substring MDN. All right, and so we see like sub and we see sub str. When you see these red trash cans over here, that means that they're deprecated. So feature is no longer recommended. You may be able to use it, but they're no longer updating it. It may no longer be compatible with modern web browsers, so it's best to avoid them. And if you're ever working with old code, when you run across these, it's a good idea to swap them out for whatever replaced them. All right, so the substring method of a string values returns the part of a string from start index up to and excluding the end index, or to the end of the string if no index is supplied. Right, so when we look down here, we give it a starting index, or we can give it a starting index and an ending index. We know that we need the rest of the word, so I don't need an ending index here. All right, return value, a new string containing the specified part of the given string. So let's go ahead and we'll do R of input I, and then we use substring. And let's go ahead and start at 0 and let's see what we get here. All right, so we get the whole word. Right, so let's take that 0 and bump it up to a 1. Right, and then there's everything except for the first letter. So let's pop this out of the console.log. And now this could be the rest of the word. And now if we just console.log first letter plus rest of word, let's take a look at what we get. Right, name is Kramer, name of names. Like this all looks pretty good to me. So now I just need to be able to go back and right now I have not done anything with these yet. Right, so if I come down here and console.log R of input, oops. If string has a slice, then you could probably use that as well. But let's see here, is there a slice? So there is a slice. So slice method of a string value extracts a section of this string and returns it as a new string without modifying the original string. Let's see here. So Now, what did it say down here for substring? I don't think this modifies the original string either. Whether the string value returns part of the string from the starting index up to the excluding the end index, or the end of the string and no index is supplied. This should not, description. I'm sure there's something in here. Well, we can also Google it. So for what we're doing here, absolutely nothing. They basically do the same thing, but just kind of breezing over this is it looks like they interact with numbers a little bit differently. So if we're starting to manipulate them or try and change the data type. So that's what I would say as far as that. So we're more concerned with what they have in common at this point because we're not changing anything to a different data type or anything or trying to run any type of math operator. But both of them do not impact the original strings, right? So even though we did all of this, right, if we look in the array, everything is still all lowercase. We have not changed anything yet. And because we cannot mutate the strings in place, so I can't just come in here and change this to an uppercase and save it in place. We actually have to reassign the value. And the way we could do that is by doing something like this. So we can now say R of input I is equal. So we're reassigning it to first letter plus rest of word. All right. And so now when we come down here and we look at the array after we've done everything, right, there's we leave the first one alone, but each one after that gets capitalized. And then the last thing we have to do is join it back together. And if we don't put anything in here, it's comma separated, right? Which we don't want. So we put the empty string in here. And there we go. We're still getting false because we're console.logging. But if I now take this as a return, there we go. So any other questions on how this one got solved? Okay, so let's go ahead and take a look at another challenge here. It's 825. Right, and we just finished camel case. And so let's go ahead and take a look at high score. So fork and run, fork the replet. README. This one's small enough, I'll just pull the whole thing over. All right, so write a method that takes in an integer array of student test scores and returns only the highest score. All right, so we need to be able to move through our array and find the highest score. Now, we already talked about this in the last one, right? So I could do something like this, return math.max, ... student scores, right? And get true. So if I was doing this for real, this is exactly how I would solve this problem, right? However, because we're going to learn about arrays and loops, that's what we're going to utilize here. So I want you to solve this using a loop and basically iterating through your array to determine which one is the highest score. All right, so we're getting a one param, which is an array of integers that represent test scores. And we're going to return the highest integer from the array. Right? Example, we'll say see below. Now we're going to access our param. Then we know we need loop to iterate through our array. Also need something to store top value. Then we want to figure each current value to see if it is great. Is place it. If it isn't, leave it alone. Done. Return the highest value. All right. So it is 8:29. We'll call it 8:30. I'm going to drop this into the chat. We're down to a few enough people in here. I'm just going to do one breakout room. And I'll send everyone to the same breakout room. And then let's grab this. Where is intro? There we go. Drop this in here. And so we're good with that there. It's in the chat. If you've got questions, if you need help, shoot me a message. If not, I'll pull everyone back in at about 8:50 and some change. And we'll go over the solution and then we'll be done for the evening. All right, here we go. All right, everyone. Welcome back from the high score challenge. So the group said that they got a working solution. So let's go ahead and go over one here. So we're gonna, as always, start off with a console.log. Look at student scores. All right, so there's my arrays. That's what I'm expecting. And then I want to basically iterate through this. So I know that I need to loop through here. So I'm going to do for let I equal 0, I less than student scores dot length, I plus plus. And let's go ahead and grab our console.log here and we'll throw it in here. And let's throw an I in there. And there's each of our individual scores. So now, if I take, let's just say, we'll say let I score equal 0. And now we can start to do some comparison, right? So we could say, is this greater than high score? All right, so you get some trues in there, right? Because everything's greater than that. So now when we grab that first letter on the first iteration through there, we want to do something. We want to reassign the value of high score, right? So we can take this out of the console.log and we can say if student scores I is greater than high score is now equal to student scores bracket I. And let's just go ahead and console.log inside the for loop, but outside of the if statement, high score. And let's see what happens here. Right, so we get 89, that's greater than 0, so we replace it. Next time we iterate through, it's 76, so 89 stays there. The next time it's 56, so 89 stays there. The next time it's 92, so we replace 89 with 92, and then the last time it's 66, so 92 stays there. So that is now our high score, and we should be able to take this out of here and then return high score. All right, and there's our true. Any questions on how I solved this with the loop? No? Okay. So it's 8:55 and it'll be 8:56 any second now. We're pretty much, excuse me, done for the evening. Remember, so this is how we would do it in production. This is how we'll do it while we're learning. Both of these are valid solutions. So let me go ahead and turn off the recording here.